Showering here in Nairobi. Make sure you carry your brolly. Hello, good morning, and keep yourself warmed up. I'm glad that you're joining us this day of the 26th of April 2023 here on KTN News. Today is Wednesday, and we have Global Today coming your way, where we center our focus on matters diplomacy, foreign policy, and security, doggedly following the recent, of course, happenings in the country as far as the Shakahola horror is concerned, with the numbers keep on ticking up. Right now it has risen to 90, and we doggedly follow the issue also of the National Coroner's Act that will have come in really handy right now, especially where everyone is raising accusatory fingers, blaming each other as far as this development is concerned. I'm joined this morning by Erastus Mwencha. Ambassador Erastus Mwencha is the chair of Africa Capacity Building Foundation. We have Mohamed with us as well, who is a policy and governance analyst. We have the executive director of Amnesty International. This is Irungu Houghton, and we'll be joined later by Peter Kiama, who is the executive director of IMLU, that is Independent Medical Legal Unit. And we'll be discussing this and a raft of other issues as well that is potentially a security issue, looking at ideologies that sometimes can be harmful, and radicalization. It doesn't have to be violent. Sometimes it could be potentially harmful, where the paradigm shifts need to be done in our brains, and we have dissonance as far as that is dissonance of the reality and what is spiritual as well. So we have a full-packed show, but let me just give a handy opportunity to our panelists to welcome them early this morning, beating the rains. Irungu Houghton, good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning, Ed. Arriving, I think, on Mombasa Road is an act of resilience and a statement of patriotism and also a love for the people. So thank you.
Love for the people.
Love for the people.
But the Nairobi Expressway actually has done the magical thing.
It
right?
does make it better.
It is diametrically different from what it used to be. Yes, Mohamed, Hashi, good to see you.
Well, good morning, Debal. Good morning to my colleagues. It's good that it's raining all over the country. I think that sometimes global warming has a positive side. Maybe I can say this is a positive side of global warming, because in many other places in the world now it's very dry. The temperatures, say in the Solomon Islands, have gone up to nearly 33 Celsius, which is record-breaking. It is important to notice that this excessive rain is not going to help us. We just want enough rain. And the heat is also going to cause trouble. So we've got to do something about the climate. I think that's the challenge for the next generation.
It is. Ambassador, good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning, Dibal. And yes, sometimes it's good to wake up to good news like these showers. We haven't had very good showers in Nairobi
in quite a while,
a couple of years, and so this is very good for the water levels, because Nairobi is also becoming a water-scarce city. But of course, again, waking up to the usual bad news that we are now used to is this gory kind of thing that took place in Ongata Rongai. I think it's Kesarian, and I think I'm happy that the doctor is coming. We need to ask ourselves as a society what is happening. And I guess this is something that perhaps we'll dig deeper into. I also hope that during the course of our discussions, or sometime in the future, you can focus on AI, artificial intelligence.
Indeed.
Yeah, Hashi has just referred to it. This is a monster in the making. And I think it's only good that as a society we get to know the dangers that we face, and prepare for that.
Prepare for artificial intelligence. I think also that is what The Economist, the latest copy, is also focusing on, and Bloomberg, many of the international journals as well. That is the new frontier. How prepared are we for the artificial intelligence, as it were? But let's see what we have fresh off the press this morning, and we are keeping tales on what is happening in Shakahola. As I mentioned, the numbers are rising up. Right now it stands at 90. Horror tales of cult graveyard, as it was going for publication yesterday, it was 89. Foul murder, one on the day. 16 more bodies of Shakahola cult members were dug up, taking the total deaths to 89. Survivors bear it all as Interior CS Kithure Kindiki defends authorities over inaction, promises tough action against Pastor Mackenzie and collaborators. You have the story tucked away on page 4, 5, 6 and 8 of the Standard today. And just to read you some of the statistics here, and yes, that is a figure right now, but as I mentioned, it stands at 90, the number of deaths associated with Pastor Paul Mackenzie's Celtic Church in Shakahola, Kilifi, as at yesterday. Survivors talk of marathon fasting, friends' last meal with missing air hostess, our hardest exposed cults hideouts to the world, and grieving parents' long wait for word on their children. Interior CS has a hard time defending authorities. End of the world. Pastor Mackenzie's forsaken hideout, and state talk staff pledges to regulate religion. That is the story that you want to follow inside the Standard today. And lower power bills, you'll have to wait longer. Government says ongoing heavy rains have only marginally increased water levels at hydroelectric dams. To continue relying on expensive thermal plants, this story continues on page 25 of the Standard this morning. Harry Belafonte, singer and actor, dies aged 96. Harry Belafonte, a musician who broke, of course, some of the challenges and impediments that we had with racism, being the first black African to actually sing in an all-out white auditorium. He dies at age 96. I know Hashi will remember some fond memories of Harry Belafonte with the music here. This story continues on page 2. Let's just continue. I'll give you a handy opportunity much later so that we can give you also condolences as well. And there is also a very disturbing story here about a woman who's accused of stabbing baby and eating organs. It is on page 3. This was in Kitengela, and she actually blames this on low self-esteem. But this really digs up the issue of mental health as well. What is really happening to our young people, a young mother, 24, killing a 2-year-old and feasting on her intestines and the liver and other organs. You can follow the story on page 3 of the Standard today. Yes, Biden to run for re-election at 80 is still at it. And that is on page 28 of the Standard today. He has just made his presidential bid. You can follow that. Enterprise comes in handy for you every Wednesday. And you can read how I turned the dream into managing billions. Read all about this gentleman, Foko, inside the Standard today. Will fading Arsenal stop City? That's the probing question in the sports pages of the Standard. This is how it looks. Make sure you grab a copy of the bold paper. Ruto Raila talks flop as MPs feud. That is another splash that is on the front page of the Daily Nation this morning. Rival camps have disagreed on the inclusion of 2 lawmakers in the committee. Collapse. If one steps forward, 2 steps back for the bipartisan. It's 1 step forward, 2 steps back for the bipartisan talks led by representatives of President William Ruto and opposition chief Raila Odinga after the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition yesterday declared the suspension of the discussions until consensus is reached on the composition of the team. This story is tucked away on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. And it says we have ellipses here, but Kenya Kwanza says the talks stand adjourned to allow the co-chairs to meet the core principles, President Ruto and Mr. Odinga, to find a solution to the impasse. That is a story that, as I mentioned, is on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. Missing and suspected to be among Shakahola victims. These are the faces here of the missing children, 3 children from a family in Ishihaka village in Mumias who went missing with their mother. And we have Miss Emily Wanje, she is 35. We have Seth Hinzano, little boy there. We have Imani Ngalo, who's 2. We have also a GSU officer, Isaac Ngala, who's 36, also who is missing. Now 90 and counting. Police find more bodies. State acts. Pastor Paul Mackenzie of Good News International Church and his cult associates are reported to have been on a daily rush to bury the dead at his expansive Shakahola village farm, sometimes ferrying the bodies on motorcycles or bicycles. And yesterday, Interior CS Kithure Kithure Kindiki indicated what happened at Mackenzie's church was just but the tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg. We're expecting to see more as they continue to comb that expansive Shakahola forest. Teachers say not to pay cut for proposed housing fund. That is a story that you want to follow. 3% to be deducted from salaries of government workers. Now, teachers are having none of this. You can read all about it on page 10 of the Daily Nation. On top here, mother from hell or mental illness case, that's a probing question. A woman who butchered and cannibalized her own daughter has blamed her low self-esteem for the horrific crime that she carried out inside her parents' home in Kitengela, and that is on page 14. President's 50 billion shillings weekly debt headache. President Ruto's Kenya Kwanza administration is reeling under a huge public debt burden. With loans maturing at a rate of 50 billion shillings every week, the situation is further compounded by a revenue collection shortfall. That is on the back page of the Daily Nation. EPL, D-Day as Arsenal Man City clash in title decider. Right, that is the biggie today. You can follow the story on page 3 and 35 of the Daily Nation. This morning, the Star. Varsity entry exam proposal sparks debate. It will be double testing. KCSE would test a number of subjects and more specific university tests on the field of interest. That story is tucked away on page 4 and 5 of the Star this morning. Now, after passing KCSE, another hurdle awaits for you for the university entry. And you can read all about this on page 4 and 5 of the Star this morning. Shakahola, death toll hits 90. CS calls it genocide. And you can see the operation still ongoing in the farm. Detectives and forensic experts carry bodies exhumed from Shakahola forest. That number keeps on moving the needle up and up. Receiver managers take over Tuju assets over 2.2 billion shillings loan. Receiver managers have taken over assets belonging to former Jubilee Party Secretary Rafael Tuju to recover 2 billion shillings debt lent to him by the East African Development Bank 7 years ago. At stake is a 20-acre prime property in Karen worth 1.3 billion shillings and the high-end Dari restaurant. Also, shock as cannibal mom kills daughter, feast on her organs. A woman in Kitengela on Sunday beat her 2-year-old daughter until she died, then ate her intestines and kidney. Olivia Nassarian was in Kajiado courts on Tuesday. She had already eaten nearly half her daughter should say, when neighbors raised a ruckus and police broke in. Neighbors told the Star the woman grabbed her daughter, who was playing with other kids, and walked into her house. She locked the door. And you can read the rest of the details on page 3 of the Star this morning. Also, CS Lenturi issues 7-day ultimatum to millers and grain importers. CS Lenturi issues 7-day ultimatum to millers and grain importers. This story continues on page 6 of the Star this morning. That's how it looks. And People Daily up next. Shakahola cult deaths. Who let down victims? That is a probing question. Who let down victims? Questions abound over whether local police officers in Kilifi County and other officials were aware of church activities and what action they took. And these are some of the sentiments here. These are the people who are being questioned. Gideon Mungaro, did Kilifi governor know about church? That's the abiding question. Japheth Kome, was police service aware of the crimes? Rhoda Onyancha, Coastal Regional Commissioner, also questions is hanging over her head regarding this particular saga. Elizabeth Usui, judge who released the pastor on bond. Does she rue the day she did that? And also, Harrison Kombe, did Magarini MP know of Mackenzie? Government on the cross, failure by local officers to act on time, and a series of other blunders led to over 90 bodies being found in graves. Now, DPP says this was terrorism. And you have the story on page 4 and 5 of the People Daily this morning. And talks to end weekly protest hit Bumpy Road. Tharaka MP George Murugara with Kenya Kwanza committee members can be seen here. That members to the bipartisan talks during a media briefing in Nairobi yesterday. Azimio has demanded that Eden Keenan of Jubilee be dropped from the team, while Kenya Kwanza insists that David Kosing of KUP be removed. The standoff has been referred to President William Ruto and Azimio leader Raila Odinga to resolve. This is how the People Daily looks this morning. Counties also to get 31 billion shillings this week. Treasury CS promises to release money after tough warning by governors, and that is on page 7 of the People Daily this morning. Agenti wa mauti. That is Taifa Leo today. Agenti wa mauti. Mili 90 yafukuliwa kufikia sasa. Watu 6 wanaswa. 213 waripotiwa kupotea huku 9 wakiokolewa Shakahola. Makaburi. Idadi kubwa ya watu waliofariki katika dhehebu linalohusishwa na mhubiri Paul Mackenzie walikuwa katika makundi yanayohusiana kifamilia. You can follow the story on page 2 of Taifa Leo. Tuju apoteza hoteli na kampuni yake. All that tucked away on page 3. And kufa kupona leo Arsenal na Man City. The Business Daily is up next. Dollar market distortion eases after Ruto directive. Foreign exchange shortage subsidized after interbank reforms. Spread between market and CBK rates now, it says it's narrowing. You can follow the story on page 2 of the People Daily. Also, how all low exposed Tuju to auction over 2.2 billion shillings debt. Former Cabinet Secretary Raphael Tuju's current property was yesterday placed under receivership due to a 2.2 billion shillings debt and an all law that favors assets auction over rescue plan. The East Africa Development Bank, EADB, appointed a consultancy firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers, as receiver manager for the 20-acre property and the high-end Dari Hotel, which Tuju estimated to be worth 3.5 billion shillings. The hotel is currently under the management of Tamarin, and you can read all the details on page 2 of the People Daily this morning. Also, foreign loan interest up 19 billion shillings in 8 months. Foreign interest payments in the first 8 months jumped by 19.3 billion shillings following the sharp weakening of the shilling against the dollar. That pushed up the cost of servicing external debt, and that is taking a huge chunk of from the exchequer right now, more than the expenditure. You can read all about it inside the People Daily. Now, you can read all about also how CMC is about to lay off 169 on passenger car exits. That is a story that is tucked away inside the Business Daily as well. If you may just have it in full. IFC okays 1.7 billion shillings Avenue Hospital loan is another story that you can follow inside the Business Daily this morning. Let's move on to see what we have in Uganda. Arrest over iron sheet silence minister's siren. That is the splash on the front page of the Daily Monitor. If you may just have it in full, please. There you have it. And it's all about the scandal of the iron sheets. This continues to rope him more in the dragnet as far as investigation is concerned. Also, this is in Tanzania, when blind religious zealotry turns deadly. And they're focusing on our story here in the country. The discovery of 90 bodies linked to a cult in Kenya should serve as a wake-up call across East Africa, where religious zealotry has gained a foothold in the last few decades, according to commentators. And this story continues on page 4 and 5 of the Citizen in Tanzania. This should be a learning point, an inflection moment for the East Africans as far as zealotry is concerned, as far as indoctrination is concerned. That is a story on page 5. East Africa may have lost up to $70 billion to COVID-19, and that is on page 4. How government saved 7.6 trillion shillings in 9 months. That also is on page 2 of the Citizen. Mwananchi still in Tanzania, kupima kutibiwa malaria sasa bure. That is, the test is free for you if you want to test of malaria. The East African this week, cost of the Sudan crisis. The trade disruption is massive with Juba facing economic ruin as oil exports disrupted. Meanwhile, a refugee problem looms, and that is bound, as we can see, most of them are trickling in Uganda and South Sudan. There's aviation disruption. This is the crisis. Flights, I should say, from Europe circumnavigate Sudan airspace and fly via Maghreb. diversion adds mileage, increasing ticket costs. Damage of aircraft and Khartoum airport will take a while to repair, hence suspension of services. Foreign now stuck in the country. Refugee crisis. A refugee crisis looms in a country already hosting refugees and IDPs. Sudan is expected to cross borders to neighboring countries to seek refuge. 5 of the 7 countries around Sudan are going through armed conflicts of their own. Nile waters dispute. Ethiopia to face less resistance to fill the GERD. That is of course, the Renaissance Dam. But Sudan's ally Egypt is still against move and even threatened military action. New proxy war. War threatens the interest of Russia, China, Saudi Arabia and UAE. UAE sees Mohamed as a bulwark against Islamists. His forces have fought alongside. And also Wagner in CAR. They've won favor with UAE and Saudi Arabia. That is the story that you want to follow inside East African trade disruptions as well. It threatens South Sudan's oil exports through port of Sudan. Kenya and Uganda tea farmers to lose major export markets, and also diplomatic dilemma. Regional leaders are still walking a tightrope in terms of taking sides between the two warring generals. That is the East African for you, painting a picture of how the crisis is causing East African members adversely. Kenya calls for Eurobond advisors. A new quest is another story you want to follow. Where is Burundi's ex-premier? Tanzania, where he is alleged to be, says he has not been seen as Bujumbura authorities hunt him down. Where is he hiding? That is a story that you want to follow. And editorial cartoons as well. Talks now. Which way? They're hitting a snag. As you can see, that has been depicted there or drawn by Ozone today. And also devolution. We have the 3 billion shillings that will be released this week. But you can see what the exchequer is giving to the pale in hand there. The chairperson of governors, Council of Governors, Anwar Guru. Every governor now has a pale in hand looking for devolution fund. They're threatened to actually strike if nothing really comes forth. This is what has been drawn there by Victor. And finally, People Daily. Silence, civil servants busy at work. We want to see the bathroom in action. This is what has been drawn by Stano inside the People Daily. Allow me to hark back to the Standard so we can actually also continue to analyze some of this development that we have inside the dailies today. Hashi wanted to give condolences to Harry Belafonte before, on a lighter note there, who died yesterday. This is on page 3 or page 2 actually of the Standard. Harry Belafonte.
The West African music that went to the Caribbean and the African diaspora morphed into something called calypso. And my dad was was the one who taught me about Harry Belafonte. And what people don't understand is that Harry Belafonte was a political actor, more than a musical actor. He used his music effectively to try and get the civil rights movement in tune with the people who were supporting it. He was one of the closest aides to the late Martin Luther King. He was one of the strongest supporters for African liberation. He was always over here during independence. He came here with Thurgood Marshall, the late Supreme Court Justice. He visited Nkrumah. He was a great Jamaican American. People can remember that he was born of Caribbean parents. And Harry Belafonte has made his mark on the civil rights movement in the United States and in the Pan-African movement. The Pan-African movement was started by the Caribbean people. When our generation of freedom fighters went to the United States and Europe, it is the Caribbean who taught them and inspired them to go and fight the cause of African liberation, particularly because it was started in Ethiopia when the fascists invaded Ethiopia. And even African Americans in New York City were registering to come and fight the Italians in Ethiopia. So Mr. Harry Belafonte Debal is not just a musician who passed away. He's a great icon of the African American experience and a great supporter of the African peoples. And also the founder of the music called Calypso, the West African art form that came from the high life music from West Africa. Because if you listen to Calypso and West African music, the high life music, you would see the connections of that African hymn from West Africa to the Caribbean and in Jamaica. So we want to wish the people of the United States, Africans everywhere in general, the people of Jamaica, Poleni Slana.
All right, let's hear from Irungu Houghton. You have fond memories of Harry Belafonte. Can you remember any of his music as well?
Yeah, I mean, I could even sing probably a couple of tunes, but it would probably switch.
Let's just hear.
No, I tried it.
We do Deo.
Don't even try. Deo. Me Deo.
Okay. All right, that was the Harry Belafonte's, eh?
That was Harry Belafonte. So I think, also paying tribute to Harry Belafonte, both musical, trailblazer and also a gentle giant in the political sense, The last century, I think, cannot be written in terms of civil rights progress without his name, like many of the others. And I think, Hashi talks a bit about, his role in the civil rights movement. It wasn't just that he spoke up at a time when it was dangerous to do so. That was a period of McCarthyism, and it was also that he put his finances. I mean, this is the thing we forget about Harry Belafonte. He was extremely wealthy in his own time. Because of all of the success of his music. And that money was put at the disposal of the civil rights movement. So he bankrolled, the civil rights movement, all the things that we remember about that period, the march on Birmingham, Alabama, Selma, the 1961 freedom rides, the voter registration drives. A lot of that was tens of thousands of dollars, small amounts perhaps now, but in those days large amounts of money that went into this. The March on Washington, the very famous I Have a Dream speech, was funded primarily, not primarily, was funded also by Harry Belafonte. But I think the other thing that I would remember him for is a very famous phrase where he speaks about, it was Paul Robeson that gave him his backbone. But it was Martin Luther King who gave him his soul. And I think the intergenerational...
Paul Robeson?
Paul Robeson was another great
drama, opera singer, a great activist.
Thank you. Let him finish.
Yeah, no, I mean, Hashi was going in the same direction. I think, one of our icons in terms of, opera singing, he was a black man, but in many ways he appealed to a very white audience. And he was a socialist. He was actually a communist, not even a socialist. He bore the brunt of McCarthyism in the 1960s, 50s and 60s. And he suffered. His career was almost cut down because of his commitment to supporting, the Soviet Union and communism in the US
and Africa.
But as you say, an icon himself, a very brave man. And it was that inspiration that gave Paul Robeson the backbone that he says that he had to go up against, white supremacy and racism. I think the other thing to mention about him was that he was also a foreign affairs commentator, in the sense that he did on many occasions condemn, for example, the US invasion of Grenada, many of the US incursions into Latin America were condemned by him. He was very supportive of Cuba at a time that it was very risky to be. Of course, now with Barack Obama being supportive, or at least traveling to Cuba does not get you an arrest warrant. But he was there long, 30, 40 years before Barack Obama. So we honor him, and I think just to close off, maybe just to say that in many ways, he gives us the example of creatives, what we call now in Kenya, artivists, creatives who are willing to speak up on social justice issues. May he travel well, may the ancestors meet him. I can't imagine what the songs will be like with Nina Simone. So let's honor him as he passes.
Yeah, let's say from Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, you know, he's well traveled. Maybe at one point he met Harry Belafonte. And Hashi will give us also, some of his songs. He's got a good baritone. He's a good a crooner. So we'll give him a bit of some few minutes to just refresh for the generation that cannot really, you know, relate with Harry Belafonte, so that we can just jog their memory for us also who grew up in the 80s as well. We grew up on this juice.
Debal, this is Harry Belafonte dies at the age of 96, I believe. And but when you look at it, his impact goes back more than just that time, because even when he was very young, he had been very much associated with the freedom of Africa. My colleagues have said much about his work, particularly in the US and the rest. The history of Africa cannot be written without the input of the Caribbeans, as you rightly mentioned. That first meeting, which took place in Manchester, I believe, in 1945, the people who were there were really from the Caribbeans. These are the people who inspired the African leaders to really go out, and soon after you saw the Nkrumahs, the Kenyattas really go for quest for independence. And even when you see them move to US, because for them it was much easier, closer for them to go, it isn't that the black people in US were not conscious of the racial injustice that were there, but they had this additional input from Caribbeans, and hence what we see from people like, you know, the march to Washington and the rest. And so he will be missed. I remember growing up as a young man, we used to sing some of his songs. I mean, like the one he says, I left a young girl in Kingston, Jamaica. It was sentimental. Now I know better, but I can understand what he was talking about. I can understand what he was talking about.
Okay. Oh, Peter Kiama, thank you for joining us this morning. He's the Executive Director of Independent Medical Legal Unit. And we're just reminiscing and remembering Harry Belafonte. I don't know where you were during that time. If at all you knew Harry Belafonte, did you also sing one of his 2 songs as well? Can you also give us, or drop a, you know, a line or 2 as well? Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I wouldn't have much to say about Harry Belafonte, but I do appreciate my colleagues' sentiments around his contribution to the civil rights movement, as well as to the world of music and the world of civil rights and civil liberties.
Thank you. All right, Hashi, over to you. If you may remember, also there was I think a collab they did with Miriam Makeba. That's one I can remember. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza. There's a hole. Then I fix it. Dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry, then fix it, dear Henry, fix it. With what shall I fix it, dear Liza, with what shall I fix it, dear Liza, with what? With a straw, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry, with a straw, dear Henry, with a straw. But the straw is too long, dear Liza, the straw is too long, dear Liza, too long. Then cut it, dear Liza, dear Henry, then cut it, dear Henry, cut it. With what shall I cut it, dear Liza? And you remember that particular duo. I can go on and on. For them that actually can remember, that is a song that Harry Belafonte did with Miriam Makeba, and now a civil activist who has passed on, a stalwart of making sure the streamlining and, of course, of civil society's movement in the US, in Africa, and fighting racism also in the US. You finally wanted to say something, Hash, as we close down.
Well, you know, it's just a really important theme in all this is that the history of the Caribbean people vis-a-vis Africa is really critical. And the scholarship around that, Debal, is amazing. We've had a lot of them here. Like Eric Williams, who was here in Tanzania, W.E. Du Bois, although he's not from the Caribbean, was part of that group. The Wales, they've got a huge impact on African history, really huge. And Harry Belafonte was an activist, but also he put the music to the struggle of the people of Jamaica, the people of the United States, and black people everywhere. And it's a really sad, a great tree has fallen for the African diaspora. No, I'm appalled. Nothing more.
All right, and the tributes continue to be paid by great celebrities like Oprah Winfrey, who said that thank you for your music, your artistry, your activism, your fight for civil rights and justice. You being here on earth has blessed us all. Irungu, you want to say something?
I was actually just reflecting on that song a little bit in the context of the Shakahola case and even this case of the Kitangala woman who
in fact,
is allegedly.
I wanted just to
we're going to go in that direction.
Yeah, in that direction.
But coming back to the song itself, I mean, first of all, the song was first sung by Odetta Holmes before Miriam Makeba, and Odetta herself was an icon in the civil rights movement. But the song is an important song in some ways because what it is, if you think about the refrain, it is common everyday problems, and the conversation is all about what do I do, what do I do. So I thought in a 21st century, in a 23 Kenya, where we are all struggling with all kinds of issues, our relationships with our intimate spouses, our relationship with our finances, the concerns we have about the economy, about debt, about insecurity, being picked on, being discriminated against. In many ways, this song is also a very common modern song, right? Where we are looking for help. We are looking for people to assist us to get through these very common day problems. And I just wondered whether the song is actually contemporary rather than, my father's generation. I mean, for many of us, of course, with Harry Belafonte, 96 years, that's almost a century of life, right?
Yes.
So there are at least 3 generations that he would have passed through and seen develop. And I think, just to close off, one of the things that he said he's had one documentary and a book called My Song that maybe we can encourage viewers to watch. But one of the things he said was that if he had known that in 2023 or the 2000s, he and the African American community would still be fighting for the right to vote, given the intensity of the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s of civil rights movement, he would have prepared for a much longer battle. And as he said towards the end, he says, the enemy of our people has not yet gone. Right? So I think there is a message there to all of us in terms of how we prepare ourselves for the very everyday challenges that we have, but even for the bigger social justice battles that this country faces.
Indeed. Harry Belafonte there. So I like the way you actually, trying to make sure that this song is very contemporary, because if you look at it,
we need a Gengetone version.
It's a yeah, the producers, they need to actually redo it again so that they can also make...
I'm speaking to you directly.
Yeah, we're trying to fix the hole in the bucket, especially when it comes to security matters, looking at what is happening with Shakahola. But before we even go to Shakahola, on page 3 of a Standard as well is a very telling story, and you just mentioned about Kitengela. Now, a young lady who is taking her baby, actually a 2-year-old daughter, and stabbing her. This was doing rounds on the social media, a very disturbing video that we saw, it was like a slow burn. She's actually doing it, stabbing the baby several times with a knife, ripping the stomach of the daughter, and plucking out the intestines, eating the organs. The woman is said to have stabbed to death her baby and eaten body parts, as you can see in the Standard today. Investigators want to establish who she spoke to before committing the crime. Could it be a case of, indoctrination? Could it be a case of a mental issue? Now that is still under investigation. Let me just continue, because he had actually picked up on it, Houghton.
So it is a very disturbing story in many ways, and I think what you've got is a young person, a young mother, From what we can read, mother that was struggling with a broken relationship or a relationship that had come to an end with the father of her child. And of course...
They were not really married. It was just...
Yeah, I don't think they were married. I
Okay.
think it was essentially they had a relationship, a child was born, and she was struggling, I think, as a young mother. And I think, of course, this will play out in the court of law. She will get representation, and it's probably not helpful to speculate at this point what may be there, but maybe just to talk about the more broader issues around, mental health and well-being. I think, we have to acknowledge that we are a society in crisis, and it's not just what's happening in the south of the country, but this particular case has some gravity to it that I think has disturbed many people. It's not just that she has allegedly killed her daughter, but did this while they were neighbors watching. And it's also that the allegation that she has eaten the body organs of this child, and the articles today in the newspaper suggest even the liver of this child. And I think that's what, for most people, is very disturbing. But we have to recognize that mental health is a major issue in this country. And we are not far from some of the things that we see even in the fictional television programs, the zombie movies, the zombie series. I just hope that she can also get help. But I think the wake-up call for the rest of us is, how is it possible that people who live among us can feel so isolated, so detached from help, that they can take this course of action rather than reach out for the mental health services that exist in the country. And I think for the Ministry of Health, several years ago, there was a mental health prevention strategy that was developed. I think is a wake-up call for that strategy to be applied more vigorously and with more resources.
Hashi, did you find it to be a bit also consternating that we had the neighbors who were watching, shouting? What would they have done much more than just shouting and, talking off?
I think 50 million Kenyans are straddling the razor-sharp social crises that this country is under. And it is barely enough for all of us to actually survive in this kind of social milieu. And I think this is called neonaticide. I think that's the proper word for it. And it is about stigma. I think that the emotional drivers for doing something like this come from social stigma. They come from a social landscape in which you become, it becomes desolate for you. It comes from a cultural world that makes you not want to live. And particularly for women who are placed in situations in this country that makes them primary caregivers of children, makes them primary caregivers of their own mothers, their own fathers, when young men or men abscond their responsibilities. Given the country's situation today, about politically we're at the edge, if we have not fallen off. Economically, this country is in the graveyard. And about millenarianism, the idea that the world is coming to an end, is a very strong thread in the very ways in which we're thinking nowadays. Because the kind of desperate poverty in which this country now lives does not give us a chance to go and try and live robustly the way we're supposed to live. I'll give you an example about healthcare. Some of the richest people in this country today are doctors. Because the very idea of healthcare as a natural human right for every citizen has been bamboozled in this country. And if you go to my constituency here in Langata, you'll find major hospitals who are participating in an economy that the state has left. And it becomes a booming business, Debal. The right to healthcare has become a big business. And Debal, when you see that there is no healthcare in this country for citizens on demand as a right, it's in the Constitution, then Debal, you get situations in which flagrantly the human condition is overthrown. And the story that has come from the cult graveyard, Debal, here, is an example and a signal example of what's going on in this country.
Thank you.
It's a signal example of what's happening in our economy, what's happening in our society, and unless Debal, that kind of pathos, remember I keep talking about pathos and ethos in this country, when if we continue on this angle of just taking on the pathos of this country, and our values become overthrown, Debal, the whole country will collapse.
Right. Erastus, Mwencha, I was just asking Ambassador regarding the good neighborly concern. Do you have that feeling that they could have done more, even if it's just breaking into the house, to try and save the child, save the mother from this particular act, but that is very barbaric. You don't know what really instigated this. It's still under investigation. But the issue of Nyumba Kumi has been raised. Do we know our neighbor Kenya is launching its first satellite, Taifa 1? We want to go to the moon, yet we have never even just taken steps to go just across to know who our neighbor is. Yet mankind is actually visiting other terrestrial places in the universe.
Debal, you have raised very critical issues, and I was reflecting on the life of this lady who goes to visit her boyfriend, stays there for 8 months, comes back, and perhaps depressed. Depressed by factors that would be broken relationship, as Houghton said, but also the economy. And here she is facing a very bleak future. And she's perhaps mentally disturbed. And this is where now you ask yourself, what could society have done? And your question is pertinent in this regard. If I were to start, say, with the family, it shows the brokenness of family now. The unity of a family is broken because we live as individuals, no one cares about each other. And so you are out there, you could be having your son, your daughter out there who lives on their own, and nobody has checked on them. I mean, even phone calls, how are you doing, my son, and what have you, my daughter, those are gone. But you also ask a question. In Nyumba Kumi, we have spoken on this issue, even on this platform, for quite some time. The way it was being implemented in Kenya, we said the approach was wrong because the approach was from security model. It was therefore not accepted by the people. I remember the late Kaiseri, before he died, he and we had had some conversation. I said, look, come and see how it's implemented in some of the areas, like there is a region in Ethiopia where somebody implemented this very well called Awasa. and you see how it was working. It had almost 15 elements in that Nyumba Kumi. The 15 elements, every morning, you had as a person responsible for Nyumba Kumi to look at, did the children go to school? Is there somebody sick in that? That is how the doctors are able to monitor. There is a disease that has broken out in some remote area that is unique. Is this environment well kept, cleaned? In other words, it had all these elements in it. And the people that were, responsible for that could then kick up the matter to the next level, until the central government is able to establish what is happening in a certain locality. But now we don't have that kind of thing. Our system was security-oriented. You then have to feel, should I report so and so to the sub-chief? The sub-chief, the next person they are going to ask is police. And so people just feel, well, this is not really helpful. We need to go back and have a conversation. Something like what happened in Shakahola wouldn't have happened if we had a proper functioning. If you go to a place like Switzerland, the Nyumba Kumi works very well because anybody moving into the neighborhood, everybody gets to know that so and so is in the neighborhood, and they keep an eye on each other. But we don't. And so this solitude, somebody is living on their own, they have huge problems in their hands. So it's very much tempting to go in the direction this lady went. But when the neighbors are broken, one has to understand the circumstances clearly, because I can see them using a camera from the window. Perhaps they had access to that, breaking the door. They didn't see how they would just perhaps get it in time. But yes, on second thought, it shows that surely they should have broken immediately so that you go in and save the child. But that is what under the bridge now.
Does it also bring to question the role of residential associations?
Yeah.
Is it just about, the plumbing and the sanitation and the security and, the welfare of just the, could I call it the extraneous issues around how we're living? But we don't really get to know each other intimately as an association, as, as residents who are living under a gated community for that matter, or a locality for that matter. Can we also investigate or interrogate the issue of this residential association? Aside from just being asked to, are you giving or, contributing your security, the welfare fund or towards a residential association? If actually this was done and we woke up in the morning, find that she had died and the daughter had died and this barbaric act was actually done by a mother, that will have been a different kettle of fish of a discussion we'll be having this morning. Yeah. But there were people who were watching. That is what really is concerning me.
Yeah, but I learned that some of the neighbors tried to access the house, but by the time they accessed the house, the baby was dead and everything had happened. So they tried to
break in. It was way too late.
Yeah, they tried to break in, but by the time they got there, it was too late.
But the people who were taking the video, because you could see from the beginning of how the act really began.
And shouting at
her. And shouting,
yes.
So by the time now, the person who's taking the video, what is the intent of really taking this video? Yeah, seriously. Can you just raise an alarm and try to, if there's security in that particular place?
Yeah, I think, let me say this, that what happened in Kitengela is very unfortunate. It's actually, a manifestation of the ever-increasing collective national trauma that we are faced with, and that when you look at the way we are dealing with it, I think we are at a point of denial. That is a serious problem. We just did, I think 2 years ago, there was a task force on mental health.
Yes.
And when you look at the findings, the recommendations are, the findings are shocking of the level of national trauma. But when you look at the steps we've taken since the report was handed over, I mean, it's a big joke. The professionals led by, people like Professor Lukoya Tuoli, who are, really deep in this issue of mental health, did a very good job. But I think we need to put money where our mouth is. The report was handed over, but when you look at the amount of investments we have put in that in terms of finances or even practical measures of handling this. For example, setting up mental health units in our hospitals across the country to deal with the issue of privatization of health. We haven't done enough in that regard. And there are many levels of mental trauma. If you just did an assessment around this table, you would realize that we also not we are not also
one of us.
So there's a need for us to be able to look at that, and this is also being made worse by the rapid urbanization that is affecting our social cohesion, in that there are more and more young people coming to the towns and cities of this country, away from the social support networks that we are used to, back in our rural areas. Most of the people who come to this city are coming from our rural areas, where there are very strong social safety nets, family, clans, and other relatives. But when you come to the city, then you're isolated. And there's also another problem at a personal level, where a good number of us are saying, keep off. It's my life, without realizing that social support network is so critical, even of the neighbors around you. In that, so also that particular tendency of individuals, ourselves, in saying my life is private, I can do what I want with my life, I think it's also a challenge. But when you look at the young lady in Kitengela, I think that's somebody who needs not a security approach. She needs help. She needs real help. So even as the police do their investigations as required by law, I think she needs to be given very, very serious psychosocial support.
Absolutely.
You know, counseling support.
Yeah.
And I would say, let's not rush to do a psychiatric assessment. Because that's where we rush. We rush to psychiatric assessment and we stigmatize the individual as either mad or crazy or has lost their mind. I think we need to approach it from you know, a public health perspective first before you go to the psychiatrist. And that's why we make a lot of mistake, because when you say, I've done this, you rush me to Madare. Madare is already traumatized. I mean, stigmatized, you know. I mean, Madare is a place for crazy people. So there's a need for us to change our mental health approach. There's a need for us to be able to invest in being able to support. And one of the areas that we have let ourselves down is the religious sector. Because majority of Kenyans are in those spaces, but the support they get there is not adequate. Why? In many cases, our religious leaders have no skills or competencies to support. And so some of them will lead you to Shakahola. Because you're already desperate, you are a good candidate for this fanaticism that promises you that Jesus is coming tomorrow as if you know the day and the time, you know, and none of us knows. So I think there are many of us who need support. I wouldn't rush to condemn that young lady.
Yes.
I think I
Well,
would
I think
add
she needs help.
Could I just take a session break, then we circle back with you, Houghton.
Yes,
And
yes,
you know,
yes.
recently as well, there was a splash in one of the dailies that was giving us statistics that around 67% of the young people in Kenya are jobless. And they've given up hope on seeking jobs. And for me, that was truly indicative of, you know, a powder cake that is waiting to explode. If you've given up hope, and they're not looking, because they say we've given up hope, we're not looking. 67% of young Kenyans. And we talk about, you know, the youth bulge and the, you know, the dividend, that the demographic dividend that we need to, you know, tap into. But here is a population that has given up. We take a short break, we circle back with more. You're watching Global City, don't go away.